very odd behavior, I think, for someone who is supposedly going on a mission trip. If your goal is to help poor people, then you help them. And you go and you spend your, whatever it is, 4 days, 11 days, 20 days on your mission trip, and you do what you can to help, and or you bring a message of help and hope, right? A mission trip, in my understanding, needs to have one or the other. What it doesn't include is going down with photographers and attending political meetings in that country that could put you at risk of not being able to do your stated goal, which is helping the poor people who are caught up in this revolutionary situation. Hello, welcome back to my channel. And if you're new, welcome. This is our third chat about a documentary called The Assassination and Mrs. Paine. It's already been a fascinating discussion, and I've got to tell you guys, I am so excited that you're excited about it. When I shared that little first chat video, I wasn't sure if any of you would even be interested. And not only are you subscribers interested, but new folks are as well. So I call that a win. It is fun to have new friends to discuss fun topics with. And this one is one of those fun and fascinating topics that has really been interesting to me over the last few years as I've encountered this documentary and thought more about the role of Ruth Paine and the JFK assassination. One thing I want to say off the top is that I've had some commenters say, this is a character assassination, this is such a smear, how could you accuse her of being part of the conspiracy to kill President Kennedy? And I want to say that is actually not my goal, nor is it the goal of the documentary to somehow make it that Ruth knowingly did the things that she did in advance in order to bring about that outcome. That is not what Max Good communicates through the documentary. It's not what I'm intending to communicate. So if that's what you think is happening, I'd encourage you to go back and reassess what's being discussed, because I think the larger picture is not, did she get in there and try to take out the president, but more, what was she doing? And why was she doing it? And does it seem like somebody who is just randomly going through life and happened to be, basically in the circle of someone who did something terrible, which we can all empathize with, right? All of us can identify with that. However, we're going to get even more into the evidence today, and the goal is not smear somebody or prove somehow that she knowingly was working toward that end goal of assassination, but that we might say her actions had the fingerprints of intelligence. So in episode 1, we got an intro into Ruth, some of her connection to the assassination, and her role in some key things like the gun being found in her garage and her getting the job for Oswald at the school book depository. The second episode that we did was more connecting her to various CIA elements, talking about she and Michael's past connections, family connections, and some of the unusual activities that went on there. Today, we're going to start out with the Warren Commission. Now, if you're not familiar with the Warren Commission, it was the group of men that was entrusted by LBJ, who took the oath of office and took office as president after the assassination. He reached out to Earl Warren, who was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, and he leaned hard on him. He actually, in the calls and in the communications, leaned on the potential that this was the Soviets and that this could lead us into nuclear war if a thorough examination was not done. During the time we were in the Cold War, and that was an ever persistent threat. And so LBJ holds out that threat. And that's what pushes Earl Warren over the line. He had initially said, no, I can't do the investigation. No, it wouldn't be right for me to do the investigation. But then once the threat of nuclear war with the Soviets is on the line, he's like, okay, I'll do it. So he heads it up. The Warren Commission is in receipt of Ruth's evidence, including supposedly 7 large filing cabinets. And I'll put up the photos of the descriptions. These filing cabinets were described as full of note cards with information about Cuban sympathizers. So these are described as surveillance material, essentially, that had been done, which fits hand in glove with the same activities we talked about last episode that Michael Paine had gone and done with Lee. And so was it Lee's note cards? Was it Michael and Ruth's note cards? There's a good case to be made that it's Michael and Ruth's note cards, and I'll tell you why. These note cards were found in her filing cabinets. She owns that. She says, they took my filing cabinets. And you should know also that the Warren Commission is later altered while the numbers are still present, as these were pieces of evidence taken in. The items are omitted without any comment. And when the Warren Commission questioned Ruth, one fascinating thing is, I should do a little drum roll. Who do you think the most questions were asked of out of the entire Warren Commission investigation? We're talking about, I think, hundreds of witnesses. We're talking about hundreds of hours of deep interrogation of a variety of witnesses and individuals who had any connection at all to the JFK assassination. The answer is Ruth Paine, y'all. She was asked the most questions of anyone in the Warren Commission. And during her testimony, when it gets down to the questions about these filing cabinets, it goes off the record. Those things are sealed. We don't know what was said. The Warren Commission heard what was said. We don't get to hear it. But what we do get to hear in this documentary is her explanation for these filing cabinets. And here's what she says. She's standing so cute up on a stage, maybe 75-year-old Ruth with her white hair and a little South American embroidered top. And she says, so they said they took my 7 metal filing cabinets full of Cuban sympathizers. But here's what was actually in it. She says there were my 3 boxes of folk dancing records, and the crowd roars with laughter. And there were these 3 little file boxes of my college papers. We did have a projector that would play old home movies, and those were my 7 boxes. We're shown this little tiny metal cabinet like this that was one of the 7 filing cabinets, supposedly. But what was described was 7 metal filing cabinets, not file boxes, not 3 boxes of folk dance records. None of that was what was described. The things that were described were filing cabinets full of note cards with the names of Cuban sympathizers at the time. This would be government monitoring of extremist groups, right? That's essentially what this would be. And that is precisely what Michael Paine describes, that he had a unique interest. So what we're being asked to believe by Michael and Ruth is not to believe our ears and our eyes, I think. What do you think? Because this doesn't make any sense. That cabinets are taken, that the person on the ground who describes them says they're full of information about Cuban sympathizers. That this is what was found in her garage. And that she says, oh, folk dance records. That's all it was. Oh, and my college papers. Yeah, folk dance records and college papers. If you want my folk dance records, I'd be glad to share. I could teach you a few numbers. I find myself again and again just annoyed by how stupid they think we are. That she would be the centerpiece of the Warren Commission's investigation, that her testimony about these filing cabinets would go off the record, that the evidence would be stricken without an explanation like, items taken in error, C note, and then the note says, we don't understand how this happened, but it's folk dance records and college papers, and these things have no bearing on the assassination. So, we removed them from the evidence box or whatever. No notes, no anything. We are taken back to 1963, and Ruth tells us that Marguerite arranged for a photo shoot. This photo shoot, which I'll put one of them here, was of the women in the house. So it shows Ruth, Marina, and Marguerite, Lee's mother, and I think just one of the children or maybe a couple of the children milling around in the kitchen. And I think it was just meant to be like a personal interest story for those who were trying to get their head around the details of Marina Oswald. Who is she? Who's this Ruth Paine lady? Who's Marguerite? And Marguerite arranges this photo shoot. Marina is taken into protective custody, and Max Good, the documentarian, asks, so when was the last time you saw Marina Oswald? And Ruth, who he's interfacing with as an older woman, she's, I think, nearing 80 or around the age of 80 on either side when he's doing these real-time interviews that I believe happened like maybe around 2016, 2017, 2018, somewhere in there. He asks her, when was the last time you saw Marina? And she says, she went into protective custody, and then I saw her twice after that. They got together twice. They had one time where they visited, one time where Marina invited her to her home after she was able to purchase a home, but the friendship kind of fizzled. That's her telling. But Max tells us 2 days after the assassination, while Marina was in that protective custody, Ruth Paine is actually the person who gets the last 2 calls that Lee Harvey Oswald ever makes. So she is our source of information for what was said in his final 2 phone calls. And in the first one, which happened earlier in the day on Sunday, she indicates that he called and said, would you call this number in New York for my lawyer? So she calls, she says, and there was no answer. She gives her explanation that she, of course, believes in a fair trial for everyone, and that she thought it was perfectly right for him to have a trial. I just realized my little light isn't on over here. I'm not really a fancy person, but I do want to make videos that are visible and good quality. So with glasses, it doesn't work to have a light right in front of us. So I've learned over time that I need two lights. Anyway, so his last 2 calls are to Ruth, and one is to the lawyer, one is to Marina. And Ruth tells him, Marina's not here. I'm sorry. That's all that we're told happened. But we've all seen it. I believe it happened live on television, but there were also tons of photographers. So we have tons of evidence of the moment when Oswald got shot. Jack Ruby sneaks through a parking garage to get into Dallas Police Headquarters at the time that he knows the transfer is going to happen for Lee to go from police headquarters, I believe, to the county jail was where he was headed. I could be wrong about the destination, but he's definitely in the Dallas Police Department. So we are now given the picture of an assassin who is essentially convicted by Jack Ruby and also by the court of public opinion without a trial. Marguerite the whole time says it was a frame-up. Interestingly about Marguerite, she had told others that when Lee was in Japan and then defected to Russia, that she was very confused by the entire situation. She knew her son was a loyal Marine. He was proud to be a Marine. Her other son was also in service, and that she thought he would never do this. She was completely baffled. She goes to the State Department, and according to her, they rolled out the red carpet and told her not to worry and everything would be okay. And so they didn't say outright, yes, he's our guy, but they acted like he was. And she says she always believed that he was acting with the knowledge of the government and that he was doing sanctioned actions when he defected. And you should also know there was a known program for this exact thing, where the US government would plant defectors in order to actually gain information from the Soviets. And so if that's who Oswald was, then in Japan, when he was put in this U-2 spy plane program and given access to information and then almost immediately defects, lives there for a time, tries to connect with various Soviets. Actually, Marina Oswald's uncle, I believe, was KGB. So perhaps is gaining information during his time in Russia, then comes back to America and waltzes back in, and there's no fanfare and there's no criminal trial and there's no even humiliation on his part. He just comes back in and resumes kind of, hey, I think I'll do some political activities with this guy. I'll connect with this guy. If that's the case, then what he was doing was sanctioned by, Marine intelligence, Navy intelligence, State Department. Who knows the originator of it, but Marguerite goes to the State Department and gets the red carpet rolled out for her. That feels important for us to know. I just want to go back for just a minute to this idea of Ruth Paine being so pivotal at this critical moment. And yet, when we zoom back out, I was thinking about this week, and I wanted to encourage you to think back. I thought back to a person that we knew 17 years ago. I tried to think of someone that I interacted with regularly for a period of about 4 months, and this person came to mind. I'd encourage you to do the same. Somebody that's at least 8 or up to 20 or 30 years ago, but that you interacted with for 3 to 4 months of your life. Okay, even if it was intensely, like let's say you had somebody in the office right next to you at work and you guys interacted regularly, you went out for lunch, you hung out, you got to know each other's lives, and then you're not a part of each other's lives anymore. Okay, how much do you think that person could, for decades, explain your motives in life and explain who you were? Because that's what we have with the person of Ruth Paine. She's interviewed more than Marina. She's interviewed more often than almost anyone else. And she's explaining their motives. She's explaining their movements. She's the reason for this and that. She's the source of evidence for many different things, one of which we're about to talk about. And yet, when you put it down on paper, she met their family in February and they had some number of conversations, she and Marina, in the spring. And then Ruth goes to the Northeast for the summer. Lee and Marina go to New Orleans, and they're not keeping up all summer long. And then in September, she swings down on a road trip, picks up Marina, they go back. Marina has agreed to live with her. And so Marina is now living with Ruth. Lee is in a boarding house in Oak Cliff. There are things, absolutely, she would be a character witness for, what their personal interactions were like, what Marina Oswald's personality was like, whether or not she saw anything suspicious in Marina Oswald. If you just assume that she's an honest lady and you think, okay, she's somebody who knew them at a critical moment in their lives, there are things that she could be a character witness about, for sure. But for her to be the person who is psychologizing Lee Harvey Oswald for us for now 60 plus years is a bit absurd when you realize she had most of her interactions with Marina. Apparently Lee rarely interacted with her, and he even would give like these little like gruff one-word answers, hardly talk to her. And yet she's the person through whom much of the cultural understanding of him, all these things come through the mouth of someone who honestly barely knew the man. The most we can say is that she knew him secondhand, and she had observed some things about his life, even in an up-close way, and none of us would deny that. But for her to be the one who explains this all to us is a bit much, I think. What do you think? Okay, now we're going to get into an interesting little side section that for many people, this thing is what helped convict Lee in their minds that he had actually done this. In April of that year, General Edwin Walker, who lived in Dallas, I believe he lived in Oak Cliff, the same suburb which is just across the Trinity River from Dallas, the same suburb where Lee Harvey Oswald lived. General Edwin Walker there was an attempted shooting, and the shot hit the windowsill, took a chunk out of the windowsill, and shrapnel hits General Walker in the arm while he's sitting and watching television one night. So this shooting was pinned on Lee Harvey Oswald, and the primary piece of evidence that they used to do this is a letter. This letter, after the assassination, when Marina is in protective custody, Ruth Paine finds some books that she wants to pass to Marina. That they were Marina's, and I just wanted to return those books to her, is the explanation. And inside a book is this letter. And the Secret Service actually takes the note and passes it back to Ruth Paine and assumes it's her letter. And she says, "Oh no, I didn't know there was anything in the book." It's supposedly Lee's note about confessing to having shot General Walker. She says she didn't know it was in there. So the Secret Service thinks it's Ruth's note. They pass it to her. She passes it back and says, "Oh no, it's not." And so it becomes evidence that Lee was the one who did the shooting against General Walker. I want to point out that witnesses to the shooting saw two shooters, not just one, that none of the fingerprints on the letter matched Lee or Marina. I just also want to point out about the shooting itself that it was a stationary target from a hidden location where the shooter could take as much time as they wanted to plan out a great shot. The stationary target is not very far from the shooter, and it's a miss. But we are being asked to believe that this same person, like 6-7 months later, gets off a series of shots that's fatal on a moving target much further away than the one that's stationary in a calm moment. To me, that doesn't make sense. Another thing that, while we're on the subject of shooting and missing, another thing that doesn't make sense to me is that my understanding, I'm no great shooter. I have gone to the gun range now. One of my older sons is in the service, and he takes us to the gun range sometimes. My understanding is that to keep up your shot, to be a good shot, you need to be regularly practicing. And that if you are not regularly practicing, or this wasn't something that you did for an extended period of time in your life, that it's very easy to start to quickly lose your skill in marksmanship. If that's the case, Lee has not been daily practicing. We have no record of him. I mean, Ruth didn't even know he owned a gun. What we don't have is stories of him and George DeMorenshield going out to Denton County and just going for a shooting day. Or, he and Michael going down to a gun range and practicing. We don't see any of that. And so we are not being given enough information to believe, between the General Walker shooting and then the lack of information about him ever doing any sort of practice after leaving the Marine Corps, we're not given enough information to believe that this man would have excellent marksmanship. I think the final thing we'll get into for this talk is these Quaker mission trips that Ruth went on. During the 70s and 80s, Ruth participated in Quaker trips down to South America, mission trips. And there's a woman who's describing her observation of Ruth on these trips. And she lays out for us something very odd that definitely calls into question this whole side of Ruth's cover story, we could call it, Ruth's self-description of who she is. First, I want to back up and say, if you're not religious, or if you are, I want you to right now conceptualize what you think of as a mission trip. What would that entail? I can think of primarily two elements that would go into any so-called mission trip. And some of them only have one of those elements. So the first element that many people think of when they think of a mission trip is some sort of service project. So building a well in a village in Africa, bringing internet to a village that's in a remote place so that they can get cell phones and begin to work and enter the economy, bringing electricity to a place, bringing food or some sort of survival needs during a disaster. Those are some of the practical, when you think about a mission trip, often mission trips will include some element of one of these, some sort of physical act of service or mercy or kindness to a different group of people. The other thing that a mission trip may or may not include is a particular message. I'm a Christian, and so a Christian mission trip would not be adequate for it to just include this. This is just service to our fellow man. From my perspective as a Christian, it's a great thing to do to bring an act of service, and it's entirely valid, but this by itself is not inherently Christian. The thing that makes it a Christian mission trip would be the proclamation of the gospel and our hope in Jesus. That's what makes, for me, if you're a Jew or some other group of people who would go to a cross-cultural situation, you may have a different concept of what a mission trip is. But for me, those two elements are possibilities that could be there in any mission trip, either a physical act of mercy and kindness or proclamation of the message of hope through Jesus for me. Her mission trips, when she goes to Nicaragua during a time that is a dramatic time of revolution in Nicaragua. And the groups there are just trying to help poor people, is the stated mission of this group that she affiliates with when she goes. But the people in the group notice that she has a set of photographers with her. She's claiming, we're doing this for the Nicaraguan network. We're going to be doing an article for them, or we're going to be doing it for the publication. And so she is peeling away from the group to go off with these photographers into local Sandinista political meetings of revolutionaries down there. Does that ring a bell for you? Does that connect at all? I'll tell you, with my eyes, just as a Christian woman, what I see is not a mission trip at all. What I see is her continuing the very same sorts of activities there that she and her husband potentially were doing here, which is keeping an eye on radical groups in a revolutionary situation that involves South American politics. To me, that seems really obvious, or I should say Central American politics. Nicaragua, it's right near. Anyway, the actual Quakers on the ground begin to notice, and one of them says, wait a second, are you the Ruth Paine, the Quaker that's associated with the JFK situation? And they end up asking her to leave. They end up not having her be a part of these things anymore. And not only that, but there's no record of any articles being written. There's no record of any publication like she claimed she was doing. Like, we're just going to try to bring knowledge about this Nicaraguan mission trip for the Quakers. None of that actually happened. Instead, They were taking photographs and videos of the Sandinista meetings, and the Quaker lady says when we tried to photograph her and photograph them doing this, they quickly left and they didn't want their photos taken. So, very weird situation. Very odd behavior, I think, for someone who is supposedly going on a mission trip. If your goal is to help poor people, then you help them. And you go and you spend your, whatever it is, 4 days, 11 days, 20 days on your mission trip, and you do what you can to help, and or you bring a message of help and hope, right? A mission trip, in my understanding, needs to have one or the other. What it doesn't include is going down with photographers and attending political meetings in that country that could put you at risk of not being able to do your stated goal, which is helping the poor people who are caught up in this revolutionary situation. So we will leave it there for today. Next time, what I'm excited to get into with you is Max Good, the documentarian, tells us, I knew it was time to sit down with her and ask some hard questions. He says, to let her story go unchallenged would be a disservice to history. And so he sits down and asks her specific questions about these situations. And I think you're going to be interested. It's very fascinating to hear him piece together the story and ask her about various elements of it. And that's how the documentary wraps up. And that's how our discussion of the documentary will wrap up as well. I hope you have a great day. I do hope that if you hadn't already subscribed, I have earned your subscription, and that you will click the button down there, click the like button, and even potentially share with a friend who you think is interested in JFK type topics also. Have a great day. Bye.